monkeypox, and I know you're going to cover that later in the show.
Yeah,
But one of the things I've been asked about specifically is, are they going to lock us down again for monkeypox? Are they going to force a monkeypox vaccination on us?
right.
And, everywhere we look, the COVID-19 restrictions, the pandemic restrictions that were put in place are getting holes poked in their integrity and in their basic goodness for to do anything positive for society
Right.
over the last 2 years. And a big thing has happened now with the vaccination standpoint. And this is from the legal front. So this is from the American Bar Association. Now, just to bring viewers up to speed, this association is over 140 years old. They're part of the law school accreditation process. They're committed to advancing the rule of the law in the United States. I mean, this is the premier association when it comes to legal, I guess, wherewithal in the United States. And this is an article they just put out. It's very, very interesting. It's titled "Evaluating Compulsory COVID-19 Vaccination Mandates." And it says here, before we go into the quotes, Judge Harlan was the judge in Jacobson versus Massachusetts. This was a compulsory vaccination in 1905 because of a smallpox vaccination. Jacobson didn't want the vaccination because he had a childhood injury to vaccination previously. So this is what this association wrote. Judge Harlan noted at the time that although the court supported the ruling of Massachusetts, it says, quote, the court would not be inclined to hold that the statute establishes the absolute right that an adult must be vaccinated if it be apparent or can be shown with reasonable certainty that he is not at the time a fit subject for vaccination. So what this Bar Association is doing is going through 3 points in Jacobson versus Massachusetts that a lot of lawyers have not really decided to argue. And Jacobson versus Massachusetts, why is this important?
Just for people that are brand new to this conversation, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, it's a 1905 decision that looms over every one of these choices that's made. So every time you want to push back and say, I have a religious right to not be vaccinated, or I have a personal right that I should be able to turn down a vaccine, this is my body, my choice, any of those, what you'll hear is, well, not based on the Supreme Court, Jacobson versus Massachusetts. I think for people that are new to really understanding how our laws work, yes, that's what we call precedent. So if the Supreme Court made a decision all the way back in 1905 when people were living in the sewage of horses running through the streets, didn't have working toilets and things like that in all over America, and we're comparing that time and what was decided then affects us now in the modern age with cell phones and what have you, 5G going on, it just seems so antiquated, but that's how our system works. But to get back to it, I just want to bring people up to speed. 1905 we're talking about. Since 1905 we've been dealing with this decision. So this bar association is really weighing in on a very old decision by the Supreme Court. But even the judge there, as you just pointed out, said, look, I'm not saying unequivocally across the board that we're saying you should vaccinate everybody. They have to be fit to receive the vaccine. And there's many points to that you're pointing out here. Okay.
Yes, and just to say, this is an antiquated decision, obviously, but over just about 254 cases during the pandemic, fighting executive orders, mandates through hospitals, federal worker mandates, have relied on this decision mostly to deny the plaintiffs the right to not have this vaccine, the mandatory vaccine. So, so the subject must be fit is the first argument that the American Bar Association article is saying. This is a caveat that no one's talking about. What if we can go a lot of directions with this, but what if you're a college student, you've had 2 shots, you have myocarditis, and you're looking down a barrel of a 3rd booster in order to go finish your college? That could be argued as something. Now, let's go on to the second point that American Bar Association makes in this article. It says the COVID-19 vaccine mandates are in no way similar to the fact pattern in Jacobson when evaluating either the rationale for the mandates based on vaccine efficacy or the severity and proportionality of the punishment for failure to comply with the Massachusetts mandate in 1905. So again, we know now that these vaccine efficacy is abysmal. We'll get into this later in the segment here with a JAMA article. But back then, they saw that the vaccine, the smallpox vaccine, could eradicate. They have those words in there. It can eradicate smallpox. It's not what we're dealing with COVID-19 here. This thing is not stopping disease transmission whatsoever. And the punishment, by the way, was a $5 fine, which is about $157 or so in today's money. So I know a lot of people that would probably pay that to not have to lose their job.
Move merrily on your way. Exactly.
Right. And now the third third point it makes here, and the third and final point, it says a footnote in Jacobson, which the court relied upon in its historical analysis about the efficacy of vaccines, included data that separated out those who had naturally been exposed to smallpox as its own category of the population. So
Wow.
here we have natural immunity in an analysis by a court so long ago, and that's another aspect again that we're not seeing really played out in the legal aspects and the
Right.
legal
No,
arguments.
look, it didn't work. All of these people that were employed, all of these doctors on the front line being forced to get the vaccination because Joe Biden decided that it was his call to make with a emergency use authorized vaccine that had not been properly safety tested. How many of those doctors? I mean, they were treating people from day one. Most of them had already caught it and gotten through it, had natural immunity, and it just didn't weigh in as being, part of the decision making. But here we now find out through this Bar Association article that the original ruling in 1905 said, hey, don't put the naturally immune into that list. They get to, that's a different deal on the side. They don't need the vaccine. And so I think it's brilliant to see, such a powerful legal organization stepping up here. And think about what that means, Jeffrey. And people, we read it, we think, blah, blah, associations, whatever. But remember, every lawyer in the country that is going to find themselves on one side of these cases or another, this is the journal that they read. This is their bar association. And so even the writers, they know who they're writing to. They're saying to every lawyer in America, yes, read this. This is the facts of the matter.
Yeah.
Really powerful.
Yeah, you can almost see it. It just ripples out into the legal consciousness of American law,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens with that. But there is a lawyer, a prominent American lawyer, Alan Dershowitz,
Yeah.
and during the early part of the pandemic, actually 2 years ago to the month in May 2020, he came out with this article. Or he was in an interview and he said some things, and this is the article that reported on it. Alan Dershowitz says the state has every right to plunge a needle into your arm and forcibly vaccinate its citizens. And well, I remember at that point you had to have him on, and you had a conversation that looked like this. For anybody that didn't see it, check it out.
Yeah.
Can you name a case where forcibly injecting somebody was upheld in a court?
Of course, yes, the Jacobson versus Massachusetts. It took place in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I spent most of my life at Harvard. And Cambridge had an outbreak of smallpox in the first decade of the 20th century. And a group of dissenters, led by a man named Jacobson, took the case to the United States Supreme Court. And in a decision by Justice Harlan, the first Justice Harlan, joined by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and others, said that the state did have the authority and the power. As far as I know of no other case in the federal courts or in leading state courts that's denied that power. So I think right now the judicial view is fairly unanimous. But you've raised some interesting points that I think good lawyers could really bring to the attention of the authorities, and you might get a decision that is more nuanced and calibrated.
My understanding of Jacobson is Jacobson actually just ruled he didn't want to pay the $5 fine. And the Supreme Court enforced that he had to pay the $5 fine. He was not forced to be vaccinated. I asked you, is there precedent for forcibly vaccinated? Are you equating paying a fine with, as you said, taking someone to the hospital and forcing a vaccine into them, something that I think could be considered battery or wrongful imprisonment? Do those equate? Does paying a fine equate to actual physical retaining and puncturing your skin with a needle? Do you think that those things actually line up?
Of course they don't, but the Jacobson case would have permitted compulsory vaccination.
I mean, that was such a fascinating and brilliant. And by the way, this is the beauty of our website. If you have not seen that debate, I think it's about 30 minutes long. One of the high points of my life, obviously, who am I to think that I'm going to debate one of the great constitutional lawyers of all times? But he made such dramatic statements, as you said in that headline, saying, I believe the state could plunge a needle into your arm forcibly. And he didn't just make that statement. He said, and I would love to be the lawyer that the government hires to defend that position. And so I had reached out to him and said, look, you made a pretty strong statement, and you said you wanted to be a part of it. Will you come on my show and let me debate you on the merits of that? In the end, you heard a little bit of that. It was pretty stunning. After about 30 minutes, I laid a bunch of different thoughts on them, but the big one there being, Jacobson only made them pay a $5 fine. I had asked, Alan Dershowitz, so have you ever seen a case where they did defend plunging a needle into someone's arm? He said, Jacobson, it just wasn't true. Jacobson had to pay a fine. That is not the same thing as dragging someone to a hospital and violating their body. And he conceded that amongst many other things. If you want to see how that debate went, you just have to go to our amazing website. You just search, I'm sure Dershowitz will get you there or something. And this is one of the goals. Let me just stop down for a second.